Maybe the first rule of preaching, or the most important, is to make sure folks come out hearing a message of hope. Another year has gone by. Another year has gone by. Talking about aging, reading glasses. I've got to go back to it. A life full of hopes for us. Some of us have dreams, losses, and disappointments. Some the small, everyday kind that we carry with us way beyond reason, and some tragic losses that impact us keenly and deeply, whose wounds will not go away for a very long time, if they ever truly leave us. Sometimes hope isn't a virtue, but merely a wish for what cannot be, for that which cannot change. For those that are new to Buddhism, or mindful practices, or practices of mindfulness, or the concept of seeking enlightenment, I'm going to begin with a piece of writing from about 75 years ago, birthed here in New York City, at a Christian seminary, of all places, Union Theological, right here in New York City, Upper West Side, Morningside Heights, built as on the shining hill, right, overlooking the world. Same thing with Columbia. Although Union would think of itself as a challenge to that shining hill, Columbia. Brother Zachary and I both attended there. It's a text written by a then professor, Reinhold Niebuhr. He came out, he's preaching, he's teaching, he's writing right after World War II. And I think it's a good entry point to understanding what the Buddhist path is teaching. And it's language that's pretty contemporary. But we're not going to stay there. The Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity to change the things that I can, to accept the things that I cannot, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's sort of almost every day for many of us. Hope is sometimes the opposite of acceptance. It can get us through the day, and sometimes, like faith, it can change our trajectory of life for the better. But before hardships that cannot be affected, hope in changing them only brings pain. There's a peace sometimes can be found in accepting what cannot be changed and moving from that place forward in our lives. That common prayer, attributed to Reinhold Niebuhr and made, I think, famous in alcoholic circles, life-saving, goes on, though. It doesn't stop there. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking as he did, he's talking as a Christian, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, Niebuhr says, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Very Christian. And it ends with an amen. This extended part of the prayer speaks directly to something that was happening that we need to be conscious of and aware of today. He was speaking to a post-World War II world. The progressive social movement, the progressive Christian social movement of that time failed to come up with an answer for the horrors of the Holocaust. Progressive Christianity was dominant in the States prior to this moment, what we call later neo-Orthodoxy. These thinkers used to be on the cover of Time magazine. These were the rock stars of the first half of the 20th century, and there were no answers. And we wouldn't hear that message again until Reverend Dr. William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign now. That's the inheritor. But in the 1950s, progressive Christians didn't have an answer yet. Theologians like Niebuhr moved Christianity forward in the face of Holocaust, centering sin as the focal point of human suffering. Skipping past the pain and suffering of the world directly to hope wasn't going to be a lasting theology that gave meaning and understanding and a framework for spiritual living in the face of such horrors of the world. And this prayer's bedrock on a theological level, on a spiritual level, a discipline that transcends doctrine, living one day at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, accepting this world as it is, not as I would have it. It didn't mean that we don't seek to change the world, where we are complicit in suffering. The prayer starts by telling us to change the things we can. Change the things we can. But it does teach that the true spiritual growth, the healing of our hearts, first begins with acceptance. Sometimes hope gets in the way of acceptance. Sometimes hope gets in the way. I start here because it's a familiar Western language that is a close spiritual equivalent to the Buddhist teachings many of us are familiar with. And I want to start there, not to center Christianity. We're going to push it to the side now. But that's language that many of us are familiar with. And the Buddhist takes this and says it in a different way. Life is not sin. Life is suffering. But they don't say life is not sin. They're speaking from their own place. Life is suffering. That statement taken out of context, which is why it took so long to get here, like most things in theology, confuses the teaching on its best days and is dangerous on its worst. I'm going to center now Buddhism, and I want to do a quote from Pema Chodron. She's a Canadian Buddhist nun, teacher, and prolific writer. One of her many books, When Things Fall Apart, found its way into my life at a time when I was ending a long-term relationship that I was sure at the time was going to last. I was working a temporary job as an intern at a UU congregation, and I knew it was ending in a few months. I was racking up remarkable amounts of student graduate debt that I'm still paying back 20 years later. And someone had just broken into the car. I was living up at Union Theological, parked across the street from Grant's Tomb, which is right here in New York City. The car I was borrowing from, of course, a congregant on my ministry's internship team, someone broke into it. And they broke a window to get to a $50 radio. And it cost me about $1,000 at the time, 20 years ago, to repair this car that I was borrowing from a congregant. It was about $1,000, more money than I was making at the time in any given month during that student ministry. Things were falling apart, ending a relationship, incurring debt, have a car stolen. If you're in a place like that, and your job's ending, I recommend that book strongly, When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. And there's a section in there I rarely talk about with folks. It's a theology that's very close to the edge of what would not preach well here. Everything I mentioned just a moment ago in the scheme of that time, I'm sorry, I skipped. This is the learning to age well with reading glasses. I realized last week I need to get the chains on the back because I keep dropping them, and now I'm ready to buy a new pair of glasses that just have near sight on the bottom and far sight, or whatever it is, halfway, right? Okay. The people that are in my age range are all relating very strongly to this, and the rest of you are like, wait, it gets more. The chapter in that I would generally not preach on here is called Abandon Hope. First off, don't abandon hope. There's so many struggles in life that will pass. Everything I mentioned just a moment ago is just vapors now. That scheme of time in my life where it was just everything was falling apart are shadows. I still run into that congregant whose car was broken into from time to time. I do your things, and she has a smile on my face. And that relationship that's over with, the parents join that congregation, and I run into them every so often at you things. And it was horrible at the time, and it's okay now. Hope for the things that we can change, and the wisdom to know the difference is vital. Here's an excerpt from her teachings, Pema Children, that may help today. As long as we're addicted to hope, we feel that we can tone our experience down or liven it up or change it somehow. And we continue to suffer a lot. In a non-theistic state of mind, she says, non-theistic, abandoning hope is an affirmation, the beginning of a beginning. You could even put, she says, abandon hope as a magnet on your refrigerator door, instead of the more conventional aspirations like every day in every way I am better and better. We hold on to hope, and it robs us of the present moment. If hope and fear are two different sides of the same coin, so are hopelessness and confidence. If you're willing to give up hope that insecurity and pain can be exterminated, then we can have the courage to relax with the groundlessness of our situation. Insecurity and pain. We all face it. Sometimes we allow it to rule our lives over the small things, and sometimes the heart-crushing losses of our lives put them legitimately at the front and center of our spirit. I normally talk about the small everyday hurts from the pulpit, often, and there are worse ones. We all face loss. We've all had those in our lives that are no longer with our ancestors. The Western world sometimes looks at Buddhist notions of enlightenment as some superhuman power to no longer feel insecurity and pain. Some New Age circles will paint enlightenment as the ability to magically see above all that. And we heard Niebuhr remind us in Christianity that sin is at the center, and that's what causes pain and suffering. Pema Children is pointing toward a different path, a different truth. Insecurity and pain will never leave us, but we can come to relax in that groundlessness and find a deeper peace. God, grant me this serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's the point where that neo-Orthodox Christianity of the 1950s, which is addressing the world as it is in the face of what just happened with fascism. It's where that meets Buddhism. When I find those 2 points, when 2 different spiritualities are speaking in a different way to the same truth, I try to slow down, to attend that teaching very carefully. It's probably going to be speaking to a deep truth in life. living one day at a time, accepting the hardships as the pathway to peace, accepting the world as it is now, not as I would have it. Act from that place. Act from that place. Live from that place. Pema Chodron goes on to say, death can be explained not only as the endings in life, but all the things in life that we don't want. Our marriage isn't working. Our job isn't coming together. Death and hopelessness provide proper motivation for living an insightful, compassionate life. But most of the time, instead of saying, life is suffering, let me be compassionate. When we're in that suffering, sometimes we don't have control. Sometimes it's really actually horrible. But most of the time, warding off whatever the small death is our biggest motivation. Warding off any sense of problem, trying to deny that change is a natural occurrence, that sand is slipping through our fingers, time is passing, and it's as natural as the seasons changing. And she finishes with this quote, but getting old, sick, losing love. We don't see those events as natural. We want to ward them off no matter what. And they're natural too. When hopelessness stays turned inward and it plays havoc with our minds, it's a damaging thing. But experience of hopelessness informing our outward actions can make us more compassionate people. Faith at its best teaches us to treat others as we would have wanted to be treated when we were at our lowest moment. And any one of us today could be at our lowest moment. And we might even be moving around with the biggest smile on our face, even though our hearts are breaking. Remember that when you come through our doors, when you're on the cashier line at whatever store across the street is. Remember that when you just want to rage at the people around you for not nearly being as perfect as you think you are or as in control as you think you are at any moment. We want to strive to instill compassion in this often unforgiving world. But we can't force compassion through ire or rage or petty acts that lift our egos above those around us. Change does occur. Time is slipping away, unless quantum physics tells us something else later, but who knows. And we are all aging every day. We may hate that, and it's natural. The only option we got. Warding off change rarely makes us kinder to be around. The crux of Pema Chodron's teaching around the abandoned hope magnet on our refrigerators is this. When we talk about hopelessness and death, we're talking about facing facts. No escapism. Giving up hope is encouragement to stick with yourself, she says, not to run away, to return to the bare bones, no matter what is going on. If we totally experience hopelessness, giving up all hope of alternatives to the present moment, we can have a joyful relationship with our lives, an honest, direct relationship that no longer ignores the reality of impermanence and death. To a Western understanding, there's a way in which this may sound callous. If your grief is recent, don't take this to mean to rush to lose your grief. You may break yourself if you try. But when time has passed, there's a point where we have to accept the things we cannot change if we'll ever be able to find joy again. Part of me, when we were changing the sermon title, I was thinking about, Dylan wrote me on the way here, should we change the print title from Living Past Fear? And I'm like, no one's going to want to stay in the service if I change it to Abandon Hope. The optics are just bad from a comm side, and I wanted a few people to actually show up with the blizzard, right? So, living past fear, it's another way of saying abandon hope. Giving up all hope of alternatives to the present moment before us, in all its hardship, in all the fear it stirs deep in our bones. That brings us in relationship directly with this precious life we have been given. And from that place we act. Amen and blessed be.